Her pilot sister saw her billionaire husband on a business-class flight to Paris with another woman. "Hi, my beautiful family. I'm speaking to you with an open heart. Right now, our reach has dropped so much that sometimes I feel like I'm slowly fading. Like one day I could disappear from your lives as if I never existed, but my love for you remains strong, unshaken, and real. Please stay with me. Your likes, comments, and shares may seem small, but they breathe life into this family and keep our stories alive. Together we can rise again and show the world that nothing can silence the bond we've built. I've poured my heart and soul into this channel, working up to 18 hours a day to bring you stories. I've even faced 2 minor heart attacks during this journey, but without your support, this could be the last time you ever hear my voice. I need you now more than ever, my beautiful family. Let's keep our stories alive." Peony Joshua had flown over 1,000,000 miles, but she'd never seen a passenger who made her blood freeze. The business-class cabin of Flight 447 to Paris hummed with quiet luxury as Peony conducted her final safety check. She moved through the familiar routine with practiced grace, checking overhead compartments, ensuring passenger comfort, maintaining the professional demeanor that had earned her recognition as one of the airline's finest pilots. But when her eyes landed on seat 3A, the professional composure she'd maintained through countless flights shattered like glass. Nathan Charlie sat there feeding strawberries to a woman who definitely wasn't her sister. For a moment, Peony wondered if her eyes were deceiving her. Perhaps the stress of back-to-back international flights was causing hallucinations. But no, there was no mistaking Nathan's distinctive profile, his expensive watch, the way he carried himself with absolute confidence that the world existed for his pleasure. Peony's hands remained steady as she continued her rounds, but her mind raced through 1,000 questions. Nathan had told Stella he was attending investor meetings in London. This flight was bound for Paris. The blonde woman beside him wore diamonds that caught the cabin lights like captured stars, and Nathan's fingers traced her wrist with the familiarity of long practice, the same gesture he'd made with Stella during their wedding reception. This wasn't some chance encounter. This was a relationship with history, depth, and devastating implications. "Excuse me, could I get another blanket?" The woman's voice carried a soft accent, definitely Eastern European, possibly Russian or Ukrainian. She smiled at Nathan with the confidence of someone who believed she owned him, her emerald eyes sparkling with possessive satisfaction. "Of course," Peony replied, her voice professionally pleasant, while her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. As she retrieved the blanket from the overhead compartment, she studied them with the keen observation skills her pilot training had drilled into her. Nathan's hand never left the woman's thigh. They shared intimate jokes and whispered voices. They looked completely comfortable together, like a couple who'd been sharing secrets and beds for months, impossibly years. Peony discreetly positioned her phone and captured images as Nathan paid for champagne with his American Express black card, the same card he shared with Stella for household expenses. She memorized the woman's features with military precision: sharp cheekbones that spoke of Slavic heritage, emerald eyes that missed nothing, a small scar above her left eyebrow that suggested a past more complicated than her current luxury. Details that would matter later, details that would become evidence. The woman's jewelry alone told a story. The diamond bracelet on her right wrist was worth more than most people's cars. The earrings were clearly custom-made, European craftsmanship that screamed exclusive boutiques and personal shoppers. Someone was spending serious money on this woman, and Peony had a sinking certainty about who that someone was. "Darling," the blonde murmured to Nathan, her manicured fingers playing with his wedding ring like it was a toy rather than a symbol. "When will you tell her about us?" Nathan's laugh was low and cruel, the sound of a man who believed he'd mastered the art of deception. "Tell Stella? Why would I destroy such a perfect arrangement? She handles the household, hosts my events, and stays beautifully quiet. Meanwhile, I have you." He lifted the woman's hand to his lips with theatrical romance. "Katya, my love, some wives are for display, others are for passion. I need both to feel complete." Peony's grip on the service cart tightened until her knuckles went white. Stella wasn't just being cheated on. She was being used as a prop in Nathan's elaborate performance. But what if she finds out? Katya asked, trailing her finger along Nathan's jaw. Stella? Nathan's amusement was acid in Peony's ears. She's too trusting, too quiet. 10 years married, and she's never questioned a single business trip, never demanded answers, never pushed for anything. She's perfectly manageable. The word manageable hit Peony like a physical blow. Her brilliant sister, educated, beautiful, powerful in her own right, reduced to a manageable asset in Nathan's portfolio. As the flight progressed toward Paris, Peony watched them with predator intensity, using her position as cabin crew to observe without detection. They discussed apartments in Monaco with the casual familiarity of people who'd visited together multiple times. They planned shopping trips to Milan's most exclusive districts. They referenced vacations to places Stella had never seen, despite 10 years of marriage to a man wealthy enough to take her anywhere in the world. Nathan had built an entire parallel life that excluded his wife completely, and the scope of that betrayal was breathtaking in its cruelty and calculation. "I've been thinking," Katya said, curling against Nathan's shoulder like a satisfied cat. "Maybe it's time for the next step. I'm ready for something more permanent, something that doesn't require hiding." Nathan's smile was predatory, the expression of a hunter who'd been planning his kill for years. "Patience, beautiful. Everything I've built requires careful handling. But soon, very soon, I'll be free to give you everything you deserve. Everything you've been waiting for. Free," the word echoed in Peony's mind with terrible clarity, accompanied by images of her sister preparing Nathan's favorite meals, choosing wine to celebrate his successful business trips, planning their future together while completely unaware that her husband was planning her elimination. Nathan wasn't just cheating. He was systematically preparing to discard Stella entirely, to erase 10 years of marriage as if they'd never happened. During meal service, Peony overheard fragments that painted a devastating picture of systematic deception spanning years. Nathan had been seeing Katya for over 2 years, maintaining her in luxury, while Stella lived on carefully managed household budgets. He'd bought Katya jewelry worth fortunes, while questioning Stella's modest charitable donations. He'd promised Katya marriage and freedom, while assuring Stella of his eternal devotion. The depth of his duplicity was staggering. But what truly horrified Peony was the casual cruelty with which Nathan discussed his wife. Stella wasn't a person to him. She was an asset to be managed, a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed when convenient. "The prenup makes things complicated," Nathan explained to Katya while cutting his premium steak with surgical precision. "But I have the best lawyers money can buy. Stella will get exactly what's legally required, and not a penny more. She signed those papers trusting me completely. That trust will be her downfall. And then we can finally be together properly," Katya asked, her voice carrying the practiced sweetness of someone who'd learned to manage powerful men through calculated charm. "Then we'll have everything," Nathan confirmed with absolute confidence. "The houses, the accounts, the freedom to live as we choose. Stella will be nothing more than an expensive mistake," I corrected. Peony's hands trembled as she collected empty glasses, forcing herself to maintain professional composure, while listening to her sister's husband plot her destruction with the casual indifference of someone discussing stock portfolios. Every kindness Stella had shown Nathan, every public appearance where she'd smiled supportively, every quiet evening when she'd listened to his fabricated stories about business success, all of it was being weaponized against her by the man who'd promised to love and protect her. As the plane began its descent toward Charles de Gaulle Airport, Peony made her decision with the clarity that comes from moral certainty. She approached Nathan's row under the pretense of collecting headphones, her heart steady now that she knew exactly what needed to be done. "Excuse me, sir," she said with perfect professional politeness, her voice betraying nothing of the storm raging inside her. Nathan looked up with the casual indifference of someone accustomed to service workers being invisible, interchangeable parts of his privileged world. "Yes, just collecting these for landing preparation," Peony said, leaning across him to reach Katya's noise-cancelling headphones. In that crucial moment, her phone captured a perfect image, Nathan and Katya together in unmistakable intimacy, his arm around her shoulders, their body language speaking of long familiarity and shared secrets, his wedding ring clearly visible as he caressed another woman's hair. "No problem," Nathan replied with dismissive politeness, already turning back to Katya, as if Peony had ceased to exist the moment her usefulness ended. Peony continued her pre-landing duties with mechanical precision, but her mind was entirely focused on the conversation she would need to have with Stella. How do you tell someone that their entire life has been built on lies? How do you destroy someone's world in order to save them from living in a carefully constructed fantasy? The weight of knowledge felt crushing, but Peony knew that ignorance would be far more destructive in the long run. Stella deserved the truth, however painful, and she deserved the chance to make informed decisions about her future based on reality, rather than Nathan's elaborate deceptions. Peony continued her rounds, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought of Stella at home, probably preparing Nathan's favorite dinner, choosing wine to hear about his successful meetings, planning to ask about London knowing she'd receive lies wrapped in kisses. Her sister deserved better than being managed. She deserved better than being the unknowing supporting actress in Nathan's elaborate deception. Most importantly, she deserved the truth. Nathan's confidence was absolute. He moved through his betrayal with the ease of long practice, never looking over his shoulder, never checking his phone. He believed himself untouchable. That confidence would destroy him. The plane touched down with precision, but Peony barely noticed. She was already planning her approach to Stella, considering how to deliver devastating news with the skill required to prevent her sister from shattering. Nathan and Katya disembarked together, his hand possessively on her lower back as they walked toward customs. They looked like any wealthy couple beginning a romantic getaway, except Nathan was already married to someone else. As Peony completed her post-flight duties, one thought crystallized with diamond clarity. Nathan Charlie had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the Joshua sisters. He thought Stella was manageable, that her quiet nature meant weakness. He assumed his deception was perfect because he'd never been caught. But he'd never considered that the sky had eyes, that flights had witnesses, that pilots had sisters who would move heaven and earth to protect family. As the plane descended into Paris, Peony knew she held the match that would burn Nathan Charlie's empire to the ground. Chapter 2. The Sisters' Secret. Stella Joshua had always been the calm before Nathan's storm. But storms have a way of changing direction. The morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting golden patterns across marble floors that had been imported from Italian quarries at Nathan's insistence. Stella stood in her kitchen, methodically preparing fresh orange juice with the precision of someone whose daily routines had become meditation, her movements graceful and deliberate. Everything in her world appeared perfect. The imported coffee beans from Ethiopia, the fresh orchids that were replaced twice weekly, the newspaper folded in the exact configuration Nathan preferred for his morning reading. The kitchen itself was a masterpiece of modern design, all clean lines and hidden storage, equipped with professional-grade appliances that cost more than most people's cars. Stella had learned to navigate this space with expert efficiency, creating meals that satisfied Nathan's expensive tastes, while maintaining the appearance of effortless domesticity he expected from his wife. When Peony's call came at precisely 8:15, Stella answered on the second ring, as she always did when her sister called. "How was your flight, sister?" "Stella, we need to talk, now in person." The urgency in Peony's voice was unmistakable, cutting through the morning calm like a blade. Something in that tone made Stella set down her coffee cup with extraordinary care, as if sudden movements might shatter more than porcelain. After 20 years of knowing her sister, she recognized the specific quality of Peony's voice when life had delivered unexpected turbulence. It was the same controlled intensity Peony had used when their mother was diagnosed with cancer, when their father lost his job during the recession, when family crises required immediate action rather than gentle conversation. What happened? Are you hurt? Is it Mom or Dad? Not over the phone. I'm coming over right now. Nathan's returning from London this evening. I'm preparing his homecoming dinner, selecting wine for his stories about... He's not in London, Stella. He never was. The words hung in the air like smoke from an unseen fire. Stella felt something shift inside her chest, a subtle realignment of everything she thought she understood about her carefully ordered world. The orange juice glass in her hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. What do you mean? She asked, though part of her already suspected she didn't want to know the answer. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't call him. Don't text him. Don't do anything until I arrive. The line went dead with finality that left no room for argument. Stella stood motionless in her perfect kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on careful routines and unquestioned trust. She moved through the remaining morning preparations mechanically, watering the plants Nathan never noticed, checking emails for social commitments she managed on his behalf, reviewing the evening's dinner menu she'd planned to celebrate his return from what she now knew was a fabricated business trip. But underneath the familiar motions, her mind began constructing possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider. Nathan's increasing frequency of business trips, his new habits of taking calls in private, the way he'd become more distant physically, more distracted during conversations, more impatient with the domestic details that had once seemed to charm him. Small inconsistencies she'd dismissed as stress-related suddenly took on more sinister implications when Peony arrived 25 minutes later. She carried herself with the focused intensity of someone delivering life-altering news. Her pilot's training showed in every detail: alert posture, scanning eyes, the controlled breathing of someone prepared for emergency situations. Stella led her to the living room, noting how her sister's gaze swept the space, as if seeing it for the first time, cataloguing details that might become important. "Show me," Stella said simply, her voice steadier than she felt. Peony placed her phone on the coffee table with the ceremony of someone presenting evidence in a courtroom. She pressed play, and the video began with Nathan's unmistakable laugh, rich, confident, utterly relaxed. The image panned to show him feeding strawberries to a woman with platinum blonde hair and emerald eyes, their intimacy undeniable in its casual comfort. Stella watched the footage without speaking, her face revealing nothing, while her world crumbled with silent efficiency. Years of attending charity galas and hosting dinner parties had taught her to maintain perfect composure during public crisis. And those skills served her now as she absorbed the visual evidence of her husband's betrayal. The video captured details that spoke of long familiarity, the way the woman anticipated Nathan's movements, how she leaned into his space with possessive confidence, the expensive jewelry that caught aircraft lighting with deliberate sparkle. This wasn't a chance encounter or recent infatuation. This was a relationship with depth, history, and devastating implications for everything Stella thought she knew about her marriage. "Paris?" she asked when the video ended, her voice carrying only mild curiosity despite the earthquake occurring beneath her surface composure. Flight 447. They were traveling as a couple, first-class intimacy that money can't fake. She called him darling with the familiarity of someone who'd used the endearment thousands of times. He bought her jewelry with the casual ease of long practice. They talked about apartments in Monaco and shopping trips to Milan as if they were discussing weekend plans. Peony's voice was gentle but unflinching, delivering facts with pilot precision. Stella, this isn't new. This isn't some momentary weakness or business trip indiscretion. They've been together for years. Stella stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city where she'd spent a decade building what she'd believed was a life partnership with a man who apparently maintained parallel existences with the efficiency of a professional spy. The view hadn't changed, same buildings, same streets, same morning traffic patterns, but everything she understood about her place in this world had shifted fundamentally and irrevocably. Did he see you? Does he know you witnessed this? No, I was completely invisible to him, like all service workers are in his world. He was utterly comfortable, utterly careless, utterly confident that his deception was perfect. Peony joined her at the window, their reflections overlapping in the glass like two versions of the same truth. Sister, there's more. Much more? Stella turned slowly, and for the first time since the video began, Peony saw something in her eyes that wasn't shock or heartbreak or devastation. It was calculation, cold and precise and utterly focused. Tell me everything. Peony recounted the overheard conversations with the precision of someone trained to remember crucial details under pressure. Nathan's casual dismissal of Stella as manageable, a word that reduced 10 years of marriage to a business arrangement. His detailed plans to eventually handle the Stella situation with the same cold efficiency he'd used to resolve any corporate problem. His promises to make Katya his wife once he achieved freedom from his current obligations. The word obligations. That's how Nathan thought of their marriage. Not as a partnership or love story or sacred commitment, but as an obligation to be managed and eventually terminated when it became inconvenient. Manageable, Stella repeated slowly, tasting the word like something bitter and toxic. He thinks I'm manageable. He spent a decade studying me like a laboratory specimen, cataloging my responses, learning exactly how to manipulate my trust and loyalty. Stella, I'm so sorry. I know this is devastating beyond measure, but you needed to know the truth before. To Peony's complete surprise, Stella smiled. It wasn't the broken smile of someone trying to hold together the pieces of a shattered life. It was something far more dangerous and infinitely more powerful. Devastating? No, sister. This is the most liberating information I've received in years. What do you mean? Stella moved to her desk with purpose and pulled out a leather portfolio that Peony had never seen before. For 10 years, I've been the perfect wife by every traditional definition. Supportive, quiet, never questioning his decisions, never demanding explanations for his choices. I hosted his events with gracious efficiency, smiled for his cameras with genuine warmth, and made his life effortlessly elegant. She opened the portfolio, revealing meticulous notes and documents organized with professional precision. But quiet doesn't mean ignorant, and supportive doesn't mean helpless. It certainly doesn't mean stupid. Peony stared at the portfolio. Inside were financial documents, property records, correspondence, and detailed notes in Stella's precise handwriting. I've been watching, learning, documenting everything for years. Not because I suspected anything, because I wanted to understand his world. I studied his contracts, learned about his investments, memorized his relationships. Stella's voice grew stronger with each word. Nathan thinks he married a decoration. He actually married someone who knows exactly how his empire functions. Stella, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that Nathan Charlie made the mistake of underestimating me for the last time. Stella closed the portfolio with decisive finality. He wants to handle the Stella situation? Perfect. I'll let him try. The front door chimed, indicating Nathan's early return. Both women froze. Then Stella's training in hosting dozens of events kicked in. She smoothly tucked the portfolio away and gestured for Peony to follow her lead. Remember, Stella whispered, you never showed me anything. We were just having coffee and catching up. Nathan entered like he owned the world, which, Stella reflected grimly, he believed he did. His suit was impeccable, his smile confident, his arms laden with expensive shopping bags. My beautiful wife. He swept Stella into an embrace that now felt like performance art. I missed you terribly. London was exhausting, but profitable. "Welcome home, darling," Stella replied, her voice warm and welcoming. "How were the meetings?" "Successful beyond expectations. The investors were impressed with our expansion plans." Nathan's lies flowed like expensive wine, smooth, polished, and completely fabricated. "I brought you something special from Harrods." He presented her with a jewelry box containing diamond earrings that probably cost less than whatever he'd bought for Katya in Paris. Stella accepted them with perfect grace, kissing his cheek with just the right amount of affection. "They're beautiful, Nathan." "Thank you, Peony. I didn't expect to see you here." Nathan's attention shifted to Stella's sister, his smile politician bright. "How are things in the sky?" "Oh, you know, same routes, different passengers," Peony replied casually. "Just finished the Paris run yesterday." Nathan's expression didn't flicker, but Stella caught the microscopic tension in his shoulders. "Interesting. Paris is lovely this time of year," he said smoothly. "I should take Stella there soon. She's never seen the Louvre properly." "I'd love that," Stella said, meaning every word. She would indeed love to see Paris, but not with Nathan. After Peony left, Nathan shared elaborate stories about fictional meetings and imaginary dinners, while Stella listened with the attention of someone studying for the most important exam of her life. Every lie revealed something about his methods, his confidence levels, his blind spots. When Nathan fell asleep beside her that night, Stella lay awake staring at the ceiling with crystalline focus, her mind processing everything she'd learned about deception, manipulation, and the breathtaking arrogance of a man who believed he'd mastered the art of controlling another human being. Nathan thought he was playing chess while everyone else struggled with checkers. What he didn't realize was that Stella had been learning to play an entirely different game, one with rules he'd never bothered to study, because he'd assumed his opponents were incapable of sophisticated strategy. Tomorrow, she would begin her transformation from manageable wife to something Nathan Charlie had never encountered before, an opponent who knew all his moves before he made them, who understood his weaknesses better than he understood them himself, and who possessed the patience to plan his destruction with the same meticulous care he'd used to plan her betrayal. As she listened to Nathan's deep breathing beside her, Stella allowed herself a small smile in the darkness. He'd given her the perfect gift today, not diamond earrings from his guilty conscience, but absolute clarity about what she needed to do and the moral justification to do it without hesitation or mercy. Nathan kissed her goodnight, never knowing he'd just kissed the architect of his destruction. Chapter 3. The Paper Trail. While Nathan slept beside her, Stella began her hunt through 10 years of financial secrets. The grandfather clock in Nathan's study chimed midnight with solemn precision as Stella slipped silently through the penthouse, moving like a ghost through spaces that had once felt like home, but now felt like crime scenes waiting to be discovered. Her bare feet made no sound on the hardwood floors that Nathan had imported from sustainable forests, a detail he'd mentioned repeatedly to guests as evidence of his environmental consciousness. Though Stella now suspected it had more to do with tax benefits than genuine concern for the planet, her silk nightgown flowed behind her like liquid shadow, expensive fabric that Nathan had chosen for her because he liked the way it looked, not because she found it comfortable. So many details of her life had been curated by Nathan's preferences, she realized, as if she were a museum display rather than a living, breathing person with her own tastes and desires. Nathan slept deeply in their bedroom, exhausted from his business trip, or rather, his romantic getaway to Paris with Katya. His breathing had the heavy rhythm of someone whose conscience carried no burden, whose sleep was untroubled by guilt or fear of discovery. The irony wasn't lost on Stella that Nathan's very carelessness would become the instrument of his downfall. The study door opened without protest, well-oiled hinges turning as smoothly as every other carefully maintained detail in Nathan's controlled environment. This room had always been Nathan's sanctuary, but he generously encouraged Stella to use the space for her charity work and social planning. He'd been so confident in her trustworthiness, so certain of her loyal devotion, that he'd never bothered to hide anything from her. That confidence was about to cost him everything. Stella settled behind Nathan's mahogany desk, the same desk where he'd proposed years ago with champagne and promises of forever. Now she was here for a different kind of proposal, one that would end their marriage on her terms, not his. The computer hummed to life, its screen casting blue light across her determined features. Nathan's password had never changed. Stella Mine 2015. The irony wasn't lost on her that his own possessiveness would unlock his downfall. Files opened before her like chapters in a book she was finally ready to read. Nathan's financial records were meticulous, organized with the precision of someone who needed to track multiple lives simultaneously. The first discovery made her breath catch in her throat like a physical blow. Hidden in a folder labeled Property Investments, innocuous enough to escape casual notice, were documents for a Paris apartment she'd never heard Nathan mention in 10 years of marriage. Not a hotel reservation or short-term rental, but an actual property purchase complete with luxury furnishings, household staff arrangements, and a dedicated bank account for maintenance and expenses. Katya's apartment. Bought and paid for by her husband with money that should have been part of their shared financial future. Stella photographed every document with her phone, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was uncovering. Each image represented another piece of evidence in what was becoming a comprehensive case study of systematic deception. The apartment wasn't the only secret property, she discovered with growing amazement. There was a ski chalet in Aspen, equipped with professional-grade equipment she'd never seen Nathan use. A beach house in Malibu, with a staff of 6 who presumably maintained the property for Nathan's private visits. A vineyard in Tuscany, purchased through shell companies that traced back to Nathan's personal accounts, like breadcrumbs leading to a gingerbread house of lies. Properties she'd never seen, never heard mentioned in casual conversation, never been invited to enjoy despite being married to the man who owned them. Nathan had created an entire real estate empire designed specifically to exclude his wife. A parallel life infrastructure that supported relationships and activities she was never meant to discover. The financial records painted an even more damning picture of calculated betrayal spanning years. Regular transfers to KM Consulting, Katya's initials, forming a consulting company that existed solely to launder money for Nathan's mistress. Jewelry purchases from exclusive European boutiques that specialized in pieces worth more than luxury cars. Travel expenses for 2 to destinations Nathan had claimed were solo business trips, complete with first-class accommodations and 5-star hotels that catered to couples rather than lone business travelers. But the most shocking discovery was Nathan's true net worth, revealed in documents he'd hidden so carefully that even forensic accountants would have struggled to piece together the complete picture. The man who'd insisted they maintain reasonable spending habits, who'd questioned her charitable donations as excessive and fiscally irresponsible, who'd claimed their prenuptial agreement was necessary for mutual protection. This man was worth nearly 3 times what he'd disclosed during their marriage. Hidden accounts in Swiss, banks that specialized in discretion, investments in rare art and precious metals that appreciated in value while remaining completely liquid. Stakes in private companies she'd never heard him mention, generating dividends that flowed into accounts she'd never seen statements for. Nathan hadn't just been lying about his affair. He'd been lying about virtually every aspect of their financial life together. The prenuptial agreement suddenly made perfect, devastating sense. Nathan hadn't been protecting their shared assets from potential future complications. He'd been protecting his secret assets from her. The document she'd signed in good faith, trusting his explanation about smart financial planning and standard industry practice, was actually a legal weapon designed to leave her with almost nothing while he retained everything that mattered. She photographed bank statements with methodical precision, investment portfolios that revealed the scope of his hidden wealth, and property deeds that documented a real estate empire she'd never known existed. Her phone's memory filled rapidly with evidence of systematic financial deception that spanned their entire marriage. Then she found Nathan's personal email account, still logged in from his last session. The correspondence with Katya stretched back over 2 years, confirming Peony's assessment. But these weren't just love letters, they were plans. Katya wasn't simply Nathan's mistress. She was his partner in creating their future together. "Once I'm free of the current situation," Nathan had written, "we can finally move forward properly. The lawyers assure me that the prenup will limit any complications. Stella will be manageable." There was that word again, manageable. Another email detailed Nathan's timeline. "I'm thinking another year to position everything correctly, then we can begin the process. Stella won't fight it. She's never fought anything in her life." Stella screenshot every message, her anger transforming into cold determination. Nathan had planned their divorce down to the month, calculating exactly how little he'd have to give her, how quickly he could replace her, how seamlessly he could transition from one life to another. She moved to Nathan's filing cabinets. Using the key, she'd watched him hide behind a first-edition book. Inside were contracts, correspondence, and records that revealed the true scope of his empire. Nathan wasn't just wealthy. He was powerful, connected, and far more ruthless than she'd realized. But power had made him careless. His dealings weren't entirely legal. The documents revealed tax schemes that crossed into evasion, partnerships with questionable figures, and contracts that violated several financial regulations. Nathan had been playing fast and loose with the law, confident that his money and connections would protect him. Stella photographed everything methodically, every illegal transaction, every hidden account, every violated regulation. She captured it all. As dawn approached with the slow inevitability of revealed truth, she made one final discovery that changed everything about her understanding of Nathan's plans. Hidden in Nathan's personal safe, the combination was their wedding date. Another display of his breathtaking arrogance were documents that revealed his intentions weren't limited to personal betrayal. They were professionally catastrophic. Nathan intended to sell his company to international buyers through a complex series of transactions that would allow him to pocket the majority of proceeds while leaving employees, investors, and business partners with worthless stock certificates. He wasn't just planning to divorce Stella and disappear with Katya. He was planning to abandon everything and everyone in his current life, taking with him the wealth that belonged to others. The documents detailed plans to relocate to a non-extradition country where his stolen money would be beyond the reach of American law enforcement. He'd already established banking relationships, purchased property, and created legal frameworks that would allow him to live in luxury, while his victims dealt with the aftermath of his theft, including the employees who'd worked for him for decades, believing their loyalty and dedication would be rewarded with job security and fair treatment. The investors who'd trusted him with their money, expecting honest stewardship and legal business practices. The community that had supported his success, never imagining that their confidence was being weaponized against them. Nathan wasn't just cheating on his wife. He was planning to rob everyone who'd ever believed in him, trusted him, or supported his rise to power. Stella closed the safe with extraordinary care, returned everything to its proper place with the attention to detail that had made her such an effective hostess, and slipped back to their bedroom as silently as she'd left. Nathan still slept peacefully, completely unaware that his wife had just mapped every secret he'd tried to hide, catalogued every crime he'd planned to commit, and documented every betrayal he'd thought was perfectly concealed as she lay down beside him. Stella's mind was already working through the implications of what she'd discovered. Nathan thought he was playing a sophisticated game, moving pieces on a board only he could see. What he didn't realize was that Stella now held every piece, understood every move, and was ready to play by entirely different rules. By dawn, Stella had mapped every crack in Nathan's financial fortress, and she knew exactly where to place the dynamite. Chapter 4. School of Warfare. Nathan thought Stella was taking art classes, but she was actually earning her MBA in destruction. The Columbia Executive Education Building buzzed with the energy of ambitious professionals from around the world, but none carried themselves with quite the same focused intensity as Stella Joshua. She sat in the front row of Advanced Corporate Strategy, her leather-bound notebook filled with meticulous notes that had nothing to do with theoretical case studies and everything to do with practical warfare against a man who'd underestimated her for the last time. The classroom itself was a temple to power, mahogany paneling, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, portraits of business legends who'd built empires through intelligence and ruthless determination. Stella felt at home here in a way she'd never experienced in Nathan's carefully controlled social circles. When executing a hostile takeover, Professor Williams explained, with the calm authority of someone who'd orchestrated such maneuvers in the real world, timing is everything. You must position your assets carefully, secure your allies strategically, and strike when your target is most vulnerable and least prepared for resistance. Stella underlined most vulnerable twice, then added her own notation. Nathan's vulnerability increases with his confidence. Use his arrogance against him. 3 weeks had passed since her midnight discovery session in Nathan's study, and to him, she appeared to be pursuing a charming hobby that posed no threat to his carefully maintained control, taking art history classes to enrich her cultural knowledge and become more interesting at dinner parties. That's how Nathan had characterized her new academic pursuits when bragging to friends about his wife's intellectual development. My intellectual wife, he'd said with the condescending affection of someone patting a beloved pet. Soon you'll be boring dinner guests with facts about Renaissance painters and sculpture techniques. If only he knew she was studying the fine art of corporate annihilation with the same intensity she'd once applied to mastering his preferences in everything from wine selection to social guest lists. The accelerated program attracted executives from around the world, CEOs rebuilding after hostile takeovers, entrepreneurs preparing for IPOs, corporate lawyers specializing in complex restructuring. But Stella had a unique advantage over her classmates. She wasn't building a career or climbing a corporate ladder. She was planning a revolution against one specific target, and every lesson in market manipulation became a precision tool for her personal arsenal. Every case study of failed leadership became a mirror reflecting Nathan's specific vulnerabilities and blind spots. During the coffee break, she approached her study partner, David Park, a corporate lawyer with ice water in his veins and a reputation for dismantling companies from the inside with surgical precision. His client list read like a who's who of corporate destruction, and his success rate was legendary among people who understood the darker arts of business warfare. The Hartwell Industries case you mentioned last week, Stella said with carefully casual interest, where the wife inherited controlling interest after her husband's public disgrace. How exactly did she execute the transition so smoothly? David's smile was grimly appreciative, the expression of someone who recognized a kindred spirit in the art of strategic destruction. Corporate chess at its finest, played by someone everyone underestimated until it was far too late. She spent 2 years learning the business, while her husband thought she was being supportive and decorative. When he finally showed his true colors publicly, she was ready with comprehensive documentation, solid board support, and a media strategy that made her look like a victim fighting for justice. Fascinating, Stella murmured, filing away every detail for future application. What made her so effective? She understood that revenge is a dish best served with overwhelming evidence and public sympathy, David replied. And she never let her husband suspect that his greatest threat was sleeping beside him every night, her Afternoons were spent at networking events that Nathan dismissed as charity. Nonsense. He couldn't have been more wrong. These gatherings were intelligence operations, where she met Nathan's rivals, disgruntled former employees, and investors who'd grown tired of his arrogance. At a museum fundraiser, she encountered Diana Ashford, CEO of Ashford Dynamics and Nathan's fiercest competitor. "Stella Charlie," Diana said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I've heard so much about you. All boring, I'm sure." "I'm just the wife who organizes parties." Diana's laugh was sharp as crystal. "My dear, I've been watching you work these events for years. You read people like financial reports and remember every detail. That's not party planning. That's strategic intelligence." The conversation that followed was carefully coded, but Stella understood perfectly. Diana despised Nathan's practices, had evidence of his corner-cutting, and would be delighted to see him face consequences. "If you ever decide to move beyond party planning," Diana said with meaningful emphasis, "call me. I believe in supporting capable women." Stella accepted Diana's card with appropriate grace, but internally she was cataloguing another ally in her growing network. The evening's real treasure came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the same woman from David's case study, approached. "Stella, near the wine table. You're studying at Columbia," Elizabeth said quietly. "It wasn't a question. How did you—" I recognized the look. Focused determination disguised as casual interest. Elizabeth's smile was knowing. "I went through the same program 15 years ago when my husband thought I was taking cooking classes. They talked for 20 minutes about everything except their real conversation." But Stella left with Dr. Hartwell's private number and an invitation to discuss art collections over lunch. Nathan's biggest mistake was believing that his social circle was loyal to him personally. What Stella discovered was that respect and fear weren't the same thing. People attended Nathan's events, accepted his invitations, and smiled at his jokes, but many harbored deep resentments about his treatment of employees, his broken promises, and his casual cruelty to anyone he considered beneath him. At a corporate charity dinner, she sat beside James Morrison, Nathan's former partner who'd been forced out during a hostile restructuring. "Your husband," James said carefully, "is very decisive in his methods. He's always been focused on success," Stella replied diplomatically. "Focused, yes. Ethical." James shrugged meaningfully. "Well, success has many definitions." By the end of the evening, James had shared stories about Nathan's financial manipulations, his habit of claiming credit for others' work, and his talent for destroying careers when people became inconvenient. "I'm surprised you stayed married to him," James said bluntly. "Most people who really know Nathan don't trust him with their lunch money, let alone their lives." Stella filed away his contact information and made a mental note to follow up after her plans solidified. Her education extended beyond formal classes and social events. She spent hours in the library researching corporate law, studying securities regulations, and learning about forensic accounting. Nathan's illegal activities weren't just morally reprehensible. They were prosecutable offenses that could bring down his entire empire. She also began studying Nathan himself with the intensity of a scientist examining a fascinating but dangerous specimen. His patterns became clear. He was most careless when he felt completely secure, most vulnerable when his attention was divided between multiple schemes. The affair with Katya was actually perfect for Stella's purposes. It kept Nathan distracted, overconfident, and sloppy. He was so focused on managing his double life that he wasn't paying attention to his wife's transformation from decoration to destroyer. One evening, Nathan found her reading at her desk, surrounded by books on art history and museum management. "Still studying, darling." He kissed the top of her head absently. "You're becoming quite the scholar." "I find it fascinating how art values change over time," Stella replied truthfully. "Pieces that seem worthless can become priceless when viewed from the right perspective." Just don't get too caught up in academics, Nathan said with paternal amusement. I prefer my wife beautiful and present, not buried in dusty books. Of course, darling. I wouldn't want to bore you with too much knowledge. After he left, Stella returned to her real reading, a legal brief about asset forfeiture in cases involving financial fraud. Knowledge, she reflected, was indeed priceless when viewed from the right perspective. 3 months into her education, Stella had assembled a comprehensive understanding of Nathan's weaknesses, his illegal financial practices, his network of enemies, his careless handling of sensitive information, and his complete underestimation of everyone around him. She'd also built her own network of allies, people who had reasons to want Nathan brought down and who respected her intelligence, enough to trust her with sensitive information. The final piece of her education came from an unexpected source, Nathan himself. At a dinner party, she watched him humiliate a server for bringing the wrong wine, belittle a colleague's presentation in front of clients, and casually mention firing an employee whose wife had cancer. Weakness, Nathan said to his dinner companions, is a luxury I can't afford in my organization. Sentiment clouds judgment. Stella smiled and nodded appropriately, but inside she was taking notes. Nathan's cruelty wasn't just personal, it was systematic. He'd created enemies everywhere, people who would cheer when he finally fell. As the evening wound down, Stella realized her education was complete. She understood Nathan's empire from the inside out, had mapped his weaknesses and illegal activities, and had assembled a network of allies ready to support her when the time came. Nathan mocked her little hobby classes over dinner, never realizing his wife had become more dangerous than his worst enemies. Chapter 5. The Inside Game, Stella. Joshua had spent 10 years being invisible in Nathan's world. Now she was going to make that invisibility her greatest weapon. The quarterly board meeting of Charlie Industries took place in a gleaming conference room 40 floors above the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the financial district below. The room itself was designed to intimidate. Imported Italian marble, custom-made furniture that cost more than luxury cars, and state-of-the-art technology that could connect with business leaders anywhere in the world at a moment's notice. Stella had attended dozens of these gatherings over the years, always in her carefully defined role as the supportive wife, serving coffee with perfect temperature precision, taking notes with meticulous accuracy, smiling pleasantly while the real decisions were made by men who barely acknowledged her existence. She'd become so much a part of the furniture that board members discussed sensitive matters in front of her, as if she were a decorative plant rather than a human being with ears, intelligence, and an increasingly dangerous agenda. Today would be different, though none of them would realize it until much later. Gentlemen, Nathan addressed the 12 board members with his usual commanding presence, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been seriously challenged in this room. Upper third-quarter numbers exceeded projections by 15%, demonstrating once again that aggressive expansion strategies yield superior results. Stella moved quietly around the table with practiced grace, refilling water glasses and ensuring everyone had the documents they needed for the meeting. Her movements were so familiar, so expected, that she'd achieved a kind of invisibility that made her extraordinarily powerful. To the board members, she was part of the architecture, present but unremarkable, helpful but forgettable, trusted but ignored. What they didn't know was that she'd spent the last 4 months carefully studying each of them with the intensity of a military strategist preparing for battle, learning their concerns, their ambitions, their growing frustrations with Nathan's increasingly erratic leadership style and questionable decision-making processes. The European expansion is proceeding ahead of schedule, Nathan continued, clicking through his presentation with practiced ease. We should see significant returns by year-end. Stella caught the slight frown that crossed board member Robert Hayes's face. She'd done her homework on Robert, a 60-year-old former CEO who joined the board 3 years ago. According to her research, he'd been quietly expressing concerns about Nathan's aggressive expansion tactics and questionable accounting practices. As Nathan droned on about market penetration and profit margins, Stella approached Robert with a fresh cup of coffee. "Thank you, Mrs. Charlie," Robert said quietly. "You always remember exactly how I like it." "2 sugars, no cream," Stella smiled warmly. "I pay attention to details." It was a simple exchange, but Robert caught the subtle emphasis on details. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Stella saw recognition there. Robert had been watching too, and he understood that Stella was far more observant than anyone realized. During the break, Stella found herself in conversation with 3 board members near the refreshment table. The conversation appeared casual, discussions about their families, upcoming charity events, the weather. But underneath the pleasantries, Stella was gathering intelligence and planting seeds. "Nathan seems very confident about the European numbers," she said casually to board member Patricia Wong. Patricia's smile was polite, but strained. "Your husband is certainly optimistic about projections." "Sometimes I worry he takes on too much," Stella replied, with the concerned tone of a devoted wife. "I try to support him, but I'm not sure he always listens to cautionary advice." It was a carefully crafted statement that appeared supportive while actually highlighting Nathan's arrogance and poor judgment. Patricia nodded knowingly. She'd clearly witnessed Nathan's refusal to consider alternative perspectives. "It's difficult when someone is so driven," Patricia agreed. "Sometimes vision needs to be balanced with prudence." When the meeting resumed, Stella positioned herself near the back of the room, where she could observe everyone's reactions to Nathan's presentation. She watched Robert's increasingly skeptical expressions during the financial projections. She noted Patricia's uncomfortable shifting when Nathan dismissed questions about risk assessment. She caught the worried glances exchanged between younger board members when Nathan announced his plans to leverage company assets for even more aggressive expansion. Nathan was losing the room, and he didn't even realize it. After the meeting, Stella made sure to personally thank each board member for their time and dedication. These brief interactions allowed her to gauge their moods and plant additional concerns. "Robert," she said as he gathered his papers, "I hope Nathan's presentation addressed your questions about the quarterly reports." Robert paused, studying her carefully. "Your husband is very persuasive, Mrs. Charlie, but numbers don't lie, and some of these projections seem ambitious. I sometimes wonder if he's taking on too much risk," Stella confided, her voice carrying just the right note of wifely concern. "But you know how he is. Once he sets his mind on something, it's difficult to change his direction." "Yes," Robert said slowly, "I've noticed that about him." Over the following weeks, Stella began implementing what she privately called Operation Transparency. Using her role as Nathan's wife and her access to company events, she started strategically sharing information that painted Nathan in an increasingly unfavorable light. At the company Christmas party, she found herself in conversation with several key employees who'd been with the company for years. These were people who remembered when Nathan was more collaborative, before success had made him cruel and careless. "I worry about Nathan sometimes," she confided to Sarah Mitchell, the head of human resources. "He seems so stressed lately, making decisions without consulting anyone. I try to suggest he slow down, but he doesn't listen to me anymore." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "We've all noticed the change in his management style. Some of the employees are feeling unsettled." "Unsettled how?" Stella asked with apparent innocence. "Well, the layoffs last month seemed unnecessary to most of us. And the way he handled the Morrison situation," Sarah shook her head. "James was a good man who deserved better than being escorted out by security." Stella filed away this information while maintaining her expression of concerned confusion. "I didn't realize it had been handled so harshly." Nathan told me James had chosen to pursue other opportunities. That's not exactly how it happened, Sarah said carefully. These conversations were happening throughout the company. Stella's apparent innocence and genuine concern made people comfortable sharing their frustrations about Nathan's leadership. She never criticized him directly. Instead, she expressed worry about his stress levels, his isolation from advisors, his increasing reliance on yes men rather than experienced voices. The brilliant part of her strategy was that everything she shared was true. Nathan was becoming more isolated, more arrogant, more willing to ignore advice. He was making increasingly risky decisions and treating employees with casual cruelty. Stella wasn't inventing problems. She was simply making sure the right people understood the full scope of Nathan's deteriorating leadership. Meanwhile, Nathan remained completely oblivious to the shifting dynamics around him. His affair with Katya continued to distract him, and his natural arrogance prevented him from noticing the growing concern among his board and employees. At home, he bragged about his masterful handling of the board meeting, never realizing that several members had left questioning his judgment and competence. They ate it up, Nathan told Stella over dinner. Robert Hayes asked a few questions, but I shut that down quickly. The man's too conservative for the modern market. I'm sure you handled it perfectly, Stella replied supportively, while mentally noting that Nathan's dismissive treatment of Robert's concerns was exactly the kind of information the board member would find valuable. One evening, as Nathan worked late in his study, Stella received a call that confirmed her strategy was working. Mrs. Charlie, this is Robert Hayes. I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all, Robert. How can I help you? I was wondering if you might have time for coffee this week. I'd like to discuss some concerns about the company, and I value your perspective as someone close to Nathan. Stella smiled in the darkness of their bedroom. The inside game was working perfectly. I'd be happy to meet with you, Robert. I share your concerns about Nathan's stress levels and decision-making lately. Excellent. I think it's time some of us had a frank discussion about the company's direction. As Stella scheduled the meeting, she realized that Nathan's empire was beginning to crack from within. His arrogance had made him powerful, but it had also made him blind to the growing coalition of people who were ready to see him fall. Nathan was so busy playing king that he never noticed his queen had already conquered the board. Chapter 6, The Silent Takeover. Share by share, vote by vote. Stella Joshua was buying herself an empire. The private office of David Park, her former study partner turned legal advisor, overlooked the financial district from the 32nd floor. Stella sat across from his mahogany desk, reviewing documents that would have looked like gibberish to her 6 months ago. Now she read corporate filings with the fluency of someone who'd earned her education in warfare. The shell company structure is perfect, David explained, pointing to the legal documents spread between them. Phoenix Holdings, Aurora Investments, and Meridian Capital, all legally separate entities that trace back to your personal trust fund. But there's no obvious connection to you. Stella nodded, studying the paperwork with satisfaction. Her grandmother's inheritance, carefully invested over the years, had grown into a substantial fund that Nathan had always dismissed as pin money. He'd been so focused on his own wealth that he'd never bothered to track Stella's independent assets. That oversight was about to cost him everything. How many shares can we acquire without triggering disclosure requirements? Stella asked. Under current regulations, you can purchase up to 9.9% through each shell company before any reporting is required. That gives you just under 30% total ownership without Nathan or the board knowing who's buying, and the timeline. If we move carefully, spreading purchases across several weeks and using different brokers, we can accumulate the shares without raising any red flags. The key is patience, patience. It was a virtue Nathan had never possessed, and one that would be his downfall. Over the next month, Stella implemented the most sophisticated financial strategy of her life. Using intelligence gathered from her board member conversations and employee relationships, she timed her purchases perfectly. When quarterly reports showed weaker than expected European performance, she bought shares at the dip. When Nathan's latest public statements spooked investors, she acquired more stock at reduced prices. Each purchase was carefully calculated to avoid detection. Phoenix Holdings would buy 2,000 shares on Monday, Aurora Investments would purchase 1,500 on Wednesday, and Meridian Capital would acquire another 1,000 on Friday. To any outside observer, these appeared to be separate investors, taking small positions in Charlie Industries. But Stella was playing a much longer game. Her network of allies proved invaluable during this phase. Robert Hayes, now meeting with her weekly for coffee and company concerns, provided insider information about board sentiment and upcoming decisions. Diana Ashford, Nathan's competitor, shared market intelligence that helped Stella time her purchases for maximum impact. Nathan's European projections are fantasy. Diana confided during one of their art appreciation lunches. My sources in London tell me 3 of his major deals are falling through. When that news breaks, Charlie Industries stock will drop at least 20%. That's concerning, Stella replied with appropriate worry. Ushtajam. Should I be advising Nathan to be more conservative? Diana's smile was knowing. I think Nathan is beyond taking advice from anyone, especially his wife. But if someone were to hypothetically want to acquire Charlie Industries shares at a significant discount, the next 2 weeks would be an ideal. In time, Stella thanked Diana for the market insight while mentally calculating how many additional shares she could purchase when the stock price plummeted. The beauty of her strategy was that Nathan's own failures were funding her takeover. Every time his arrogance cost the company money, every time his poor decisions spooked investors, every time his cruelty damaged employee morale, the stock price dropped and Stella bought more shares at bargain prices. Nathan, meanwhile, remained completely oblivious to the systematic acquisition of his company. His attention was divided between managing his affair with Katya and pursuing increasingly risky expansion plans. He'd never thought to monitor his own stock ownership because he couldn't imagine anyone challenging his control. The affair was actually accelerating Nathan's downfall. His frequent trips to Paris, his distracted attention during important meetings, and his growing impatience with anyone who questioned his decisions were creating exactly the kind of leadership vacuum that made investors nervous. At a company board meeting, Stella watched Nathan dismiss Robert Hayes' concerns about cash flow with casual arrogance. Robert, I appreciate your caution, but this company wasn't built by playing it safe, Nathan said dismissively. Sometimes vision requires courage that conservatives can't understand. The insult landed exactly as Stella had expected. Robert's face flushed with anger, and several other board members shifted uncomfortably. Nathan had just alienated one of his most influential board members in front of the entire leadership team. After the meeting, Robert approached Stella with barely contained fury. Your husband just called me a coward in front of the entire board, he said quietly. I'm so sorry, Robert. Nathan's been under tremendous stress lately. I don't think he meant... Oh, he meant it, Robert interrupted. The question is what we're going to do about it. What do you mean? Robert glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. Several board members have approached me about our concerns with Nathan's leadership. We're considering calling for a vote of no confidence. Stella's pulse quickened, but she maintained her expression of wifely concern. That sounds very serious. It is serious. Nathan's decisions are putting the company at risk, and his treatment of employees and board members is becoming unacceptable. Robert paused, studying Stella carefully. The question is whether we have enough support to succeed. What kind of support would you need? Ultimately, it comes down to stock ownership. If we can demonstrate that a majority of shareholders support new leadership, we can force Nathan out. Robert's eyes held hers meaningfully. The problem is that Nathan still controls 45% of the company through his personal holdings and allied investors. Stella nodded thoughtfully while mentally calculating her own accumulation. Through her 3 shell companies, she now controlled 28% of Charlie Industries. Combined with Robert's faction and other disgruntled shareholders, they would have more than enough votes to remove Nathan from power. "I understand this is difficult for you," Robert continued gently. "Nathan is your husband, and I'm not asking you to choose sides. But if you have any influence with him, perhaps you could suggest he consider stepping back voluntarily. It would save everyone a great deal of unpleasantness." "I'll talk to him," Stella promised, knowing full well that Nathan would never voluntarily relinquish control. His arrogance wouldn't allow it. That evening, she kept her promise and approached Nathan about the board's concerns. "Darling," once she said carefully as they shared wine after dinner, "I've been hearing some concerning talk about the company. Some people seem worried about the recent direction." Nathan's laugh was dismissive. "Let me guess. Robert Hayes has been filling your head with his conservative nonsense." He did express some concerns about cash flow and the European expansion. "Robert Hayes is a relic who wouldn't recognize opportunity if it bit him on the ass," Nathan interrupted. "The board needs to remember who built this company and who continues to drive its success." "I'm sure you're right," Stella said soothingly. "I just thought you should know that some people seem unsettled. Then maybe it's time to remind them who's in charge," Nathan said with dangerous calm. "A board shake-up might be exactly what this company needs." Stella nodded supportively while internally celebrating Nathan's response. His threat to remove board members would only accelerate their timeline for his removal. Nathan was digging his own grave with characteristic arrogance. Over the following week, Stella made her final stock purchases, bringing her total ownership to just over 30% of Charlie Industries. She also began discreetly reaching out to other shareholders who'd grown dissatisfied with Nathan's leadership. The pieces were all in position. The board was ready to revolt. The employees had lost faith in Nathan's leadership, and Stella controlled enough shares to tip any vote in her favor. All that remained was waiting for Nathan to make the final mistake that would justify his removal. She didn't have to wait. When the final share purchase cleared, Stella owned more than just Nathan's heart. She owned his entire world. Chapter 7. Happy birthday, darling. Nathan Charlie woke up on his birthday, expecting cake and champagne. Stella served him divorce papers and handcuffs instead. The morning of Nathan's 41st birthday dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the penthouse windows and casting golden patterns across their bedroom carpet. Nathan stretched luxuriously in their king-sized bed, feeling particularly satisfied with the way his life was unfolding according to his carefully orchestrated design. Stella was already up, moving quietly through their morning routine with the grace that had first captivated him years ago at a charity gala where she'd been the most elegant woman in a room full of society beauties. She wore a silk robe that he'd selected for her, her dark hair catching the morning light as she prepared his coffee, with the precision of someone who'd mastered the art of anticipating his every preference. "Happy birthday, darling," she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead with perfect tenderness, her lips soft against his skin. "I have quite a day planned for you. Surprises that will change everything." Nathan pulled her close, breathing in her familiar perfume, the same scent she'd worn on their wedding day, chosen because he'd mentioned liking it on another woman at a business dinner. So many details of their life together had been shaped by his preferences, his desires, his vision of what their marriage should look like. "I hope it involves that new restaurant in Soho you mentioned," he said, with the lazy confidence of someone who expected the world to arrange itself for his pleasure. "And maybe a private celebration afterward. Something intimate, just the two of us." "Oh, there will definitely be surprises," Stella promised, her smile mysterious and beautiful. "Some you'll never see coming, some that will stay with you for the rest of your life." Nathan showered and dressed in his favorite suit, Italian silk that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Today, he felt particularly good about himself. The company was profitable. Katya had been especially passionate during their last Paris rendezvous, and life was unfolding exactly according to his design. Stella had prepared his favorite breakfast, Belgian waffles with fresh berries and perfectly brewed coffee. She sat across from him, sipping her own coffee while watching him eat with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You seem different today," Nathan observed. "Radiant, almost." "I feel different," Stella replied truthfully. "Today feels like the beginning of something entirely new." Nathan's phone buzzed with birthday messages from colleagues and friends, each trying to outdo the others with flattery and best wishes. He basked in the attention, scrolling through the messages, while Stella cleared away breakfast dishes. "The board called a special meeting for this afternoon," he mentioned casually. "Probably planning some birthday surprise. Robert Hayes suggested it might be about the quarterly bonuses." "How thoughtful of them," Stella said, her voice perfectly neutral. "I'm sure it will be memorable." Nathan left for the office in high spirits, kissing Stella goodbye with the casual affection of someone who believed the world revolved around his desires. He had no idea that his wife had spent the morning making final phone calls to attorneys, investigators, and very special friends at the Securities and Exchange Commission. The first sign something was wrong came when Nathan arrived at Charlie Industries to find federal agents in the lobby. His assistant, Jennifer, met him at the elevator with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Mr. Charlie, there are investigators here. They have warrants. They're asking about financial records," and Jennifer's voice trailed off as she noticed the agents approaching. Nathan Charlie. The lead agent, a stern woman in a navy suit, extended her credentials. "I'm Agent Sarah Williams with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have a warrant to search these premises and seize financial records related to ongoing fraud investigation." Nathan's confident smile never wavered, but Stella would have recognized the microscopic tension that appeared in his shoulders. "I'm sure there's been some mistake. My lawyers will sort this out quickly. You're welcome to call your attorneys," Agent Williams replied coldly. "But this warrant is valid, and we'll be conducting a thorough review of your financial records." As federal agents spread throughout the building, Nathan retreated to his office to make desperate phone calls. His lawyers were mysteriously unavailable, his accountant wasn't returning calls, and his usual political connections seemed to have vanished. Meanwhile, news trucks were gathering outside the building. Someone had tipped off the media about the federal investigation, and reporters were already speculating about fraud charges and corporate corruption. Nathan's phone rang constantly, investors demanding explanations, business partners distancing themselves, board members asking urgent questions he couldn't answer. With each call, he could feel his carefully constructed empire beginning to crack. At noon, Jennifer knocked tentatively on his door. "Mr. Charlie, your wife is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Nathan looked up from his desk, where financial documents were scattered like evidence of a disaster. Stella appeared in his doorway, elegant as always, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing an expression he'd never seen before. "Hello, Nathan," she said calmly, closing the door behind her. "Happy birthday. Stella, thank God you're here. This is some kind of nightmare. Federal agents, fraud investigations, someone's trying to destroy me." "Yes," Stella said simply. "Someone is." Nathan paused, studying his wife's face. For the first time in years, he really looked at her, not as decoration or supporting cast, but as an individual with her own thoughts and motivations. "What do you mean?" he asked slowly. Stella opened her portfolio and placed a set of documents on his desk. "Divorce papers," she said matter-of-factly. "I'm filing for dissolution of our marriage on grounds of adultery, fraud, and financial misconduct." Nathan stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language.
"Stella, what are you talking about?"
"This isn't the time for jokes." "I'm not joking," Stella replied with crystalline clarity. "I know about Katya. I know about the Paris apartment, the secret accounts, the hidden properties. I know about your plans to divorce me and disappear with your stolen money." The color drained from Nathan's face. "How could you possibly—" "I know everything, Nathan. Every lie you've told, every crime you've committed, every betrayal you've planned." Stella's voice was steady as steel. "The federal investigation? That started with evidence I provided 6 weeks ago." Nathan's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. You did this?" "I did this," Stella confirmed with quiet satisfaction. "You called me manageable. You underestimated me. That was your fatal mistake. But why? I gave you everything. You gave me nothing." For the first time, Stella's composure cracked, revealing the fury underneath. "You gave me lies, betrayal, and contempt. You treated me like property, while planning to discard me like garbage." Nathan's desk phone rang, interrupting his shock. Jennifer's voice was tight with panic. "Mr. Charlie, the board is demanding an emergency meeting. They're saying something about a vote of no confidence." Stella smiled. "That would be the second part of my birthday gift to you. The board? You couldn't possibly influence the board. Nathan, you brilliant fool," Stella said with something approaching pity. "I've been influencing the board for months. They've lost confidence in your leadership. They're horrified by your fraud, and they're ready to remove you from power. Even if that were true, I control the majority of shares. Actually, you don't." Stella placed another document on his desk. "Stock ownership records show that I now control 31% of Charlie Industries through various investment vehicles. Combined with board members and other disgruntled shareholders, we have more than enough votes to remove you." Nathan stared at the ownership documents with dawning horror. "This is impossible. You don't have this kind of money. My grandmother's trust fund, carefully invested over the years. You always dismissed it as pin money, remember? You never bothered to track my independent assets." Stella's smile was razor-sharp. "Your arrogance blinded you to everything that mattered." Nathan's office door burst open, and Agent Williams entered with 2 other investigators. "Mr. Charlie, you're under arrest for securities fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering." As the handcuffs clicked around Nathan's wrists, he looked at Stella with an expression of absolute bewilderment. "You destroyed me. You destroyed everything." "No," Stella corrected him gently. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone could see the ruins." Nathan was led away in handcuffs while news cameras captured every moment of his humiliation. His birthday had become the day his empire crumbled, his freedom ended, and his wife revealed herself as the architect of his destruction. As Nathan was escorted from the building, Stella stood at his office window, watching the man who'd called her manageable being driven away in the back of a federal vehicle. Nathan's birthday wish had always been more power. Stella gave him powerlessness instead. Chapter 8. The Empress Speaks. The boardroom had never seen a black woman command such absolute authority until Stella Joshua walked in wearing a crown of pure confidence. The emergency board meeting of Charlie Industries convened at 4 o'clock sharp. Exactly 3 hours after Nathan's arrest had dominated every news channel in the city. The 12 board members sat around the polished conference table with expressions ranging from shock to grim satisfaction, while cameras from major networks waited outside for the inevitable announcement. Stella entered the boardroom at precisely 4:15, her timing calculated for maximum impact. She wore a tailored black suit that commanded respect. Her hair swept back in a style that revealed the diamond earrings Nathan had given her, a final, ironic touch. Every eye in the room focused on her as she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was about to accomplish. "Gentlemen, ladies," Stella said, taking her seat at the foot of the table, not in the gallery where wives traditionally observed, but at the table itself. "Thank you for accommodating this emergency session." Robert Hayes, acting as interim chairman, cleared his throat nervously. "Mrs. Charlie, while we appreciate your concern during this difficult time, board meetings are typically restricted to board members and major shareholders. Stella interrupted smoothly, placing a thick folder on the table. Which brings me to my first order of business. She opened the folder and distributed copies of documents to each board member. As of this morning, I control 31% of Charlie Industries through Phoenix Holdings, Aurora Investments, and Meridian Capital. This makes me the largest single shareholder in the company. The room erupted in surprised murmurs as board members studied the ownership documents. Patricia Wong looked up with undisguised amazement. Mrs. Charlie, these numbers. How is this possible? Please, Stella said with quiet authority, call me Stella. And to answer your question, while my husband was busy stealing from this company and betraying everyone who trusted him, I was systematically acquiring shares at prices deflated by his own incompetence. Robert Hayes studied the documents with the intensity of someone recalculating everything he thought he knew. Stella, this is extraordinary. But surely you understand that stock ownership alone doesn't give me the right to remove Nathan from his position. Stella finished. Actually, combined with the votes I've secured from other shareholders disgusted by Nathan's behavior, it does exactly that. She stood and moved to the head of the table, where Nathan's chair sat empty. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. For 10 years, I've attended these meetings as decoration, Stella continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned her position through intelligence and determination. I've served coffee, taken notes, and smiled while Nathan made decisions that enriched him personally while damaging this company. Board member Thomas Wright shifted uncomfortably. Stella, we all respected Nathan's leadership. Did you? Stella's gaze fixed on Thomas with laser intensity. Did you respect his decision to embezzle funds for personal properties? Did you admire his choice to manipulate quarterly reports to hide losses? Were you impressed by his plan to sell the company to foreign buyers and disappear with the profits? The silence that followed was deafening. Several board members exchanged shocked glances, clearly hearing about Nathan's crimes in detail for the first time. Stella opened another section of her folder and began distributing additional documents. Bank records showing illegal transfers, property deeds for assets purchased with company funds, email correspondence detailing Nathan's plans to abandon this company and everyone in it. As board members reviewed the evidence, their expressions shifted from surprise to anger to disgust. Patricia Wong shook her head in disbelief. I knew Nathan was aggressive, but this is criminal. Yes, it is, Stella agreed. Which is why the Securities and Exchange Commission arrested him this morning based on evidence I provided over the past 6 weeks. Robert Hayes looked up from the documents with something approaching awe. You orchestrated this entire investigation. I provided federal investigators with documentation of Nathan's crimes, Stella corrected. The investigation conducted itself, Thomas Wright frowned. But why didn't you come to the board first? We could have handled this internally. Could you? Stella's voice carried steel beneath the silk. With respect, Thomas, Nathan controlled this board through intimidation and manipulation. How many times did any of you successfully challenge his decisions? How often did your concerns result in meaningful changes? The uncomfortable silence that followed answered her question perfectly. Nathan succeeded for so long because he understood that people see what they expect to see, Stella continued. You expected a quiet, supportive wife, so you never noticed that I was learning your business, understanding your industry, and building relationships with your competitors and critics. She moved around the table, making eye contact with each board member as she spoke. Diana Ashford told me about Nathan's failed European deals 3 weeks before they became public. James Morrison shared details about Nathan's fraudulent accounting practices. Robert, you provided insights into board dynamics that helped me time my stock purchases perfectly. Robert's eyes widened. You played us. I learned from you, Stella corrected. There's a difference. Everyone in this room wanted Nathan removed. You just didn't have the power or coordination to do it. I provided both. Patricia Wong raised her hand tentatively. What happens now? With Nathan arrested and facing criminal charges, the company needs leadership. The company needs competent leadership, Stella interrupted. Which brings me to my proposal. She returned to the head of the table and placed her final document in front of each board member. I'm calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in Nathan Charlie as CEO and chairman. Furthermore, I'm proposing myself as interim CEO while we conduct a proper search for permanent leadership. The room fell completely silent. Several board members stared at Stella as if seeing her for the first time, which she reflected they essentially were. You want to be CEO? Thomas asked incredulously. I want this company to survive Nathan's destruction, Stella replied firmly. I've spent 6 months studying every aspect of this business, from financial operations to employee relations to market positioning. I understand our challenges, our opportunities, and most importantly, our values. Robert leaned back in his chair, studying Stella with newfound respect. What makes you think you can run a company? Because I've been watching Nathan run it into the ground for years, Stella answered with devastating honesty. Because I understand that leadership means serving others, not exploiting them. Because I believe in transparency, collaboration, and treating employees like human beings rather than disposable resources. She gestured to the documents spread across the table. I've already demonstrated my ability to execute complex strategies, build coalitions, and achieve objectives. The only question is whether you're ready to support competent leadership instead of destructive ego. Patricia Wong spoke first. I move to call a vote of no confidence in Nathan Charlie as CEO and chairman of Charlie Industries. Seconded, Robert Hayes said immediately. All in favor? Stella asked. 12 hands rose unanimously. Motion carries, Stella announced with satisfaction. Nathan Charlie is hereby removed from all positions of authority within this company. Thomas Wright cleared his throat. Regarding your proposal for interim CEO, I move to appoint Stella Joshua as interim CEO of Charlie Industries, Robert interrupted. Seconded, Patricia added. All in favor? Once again, 12 hands rose in unison. Motion carries, Stella said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. I accept the position of interim CEO. As the board members filed out to face the waiting reporters, Robert Hayes approached Stella with the expression of genuine admiration. You know, he said quietly, I've been in corporate America for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished. Nathan taught me well, Stella replied with a slight smile. He showed me exactly what not to do. Outside, the media was waiting for the announcement that would dominate headlines around the world. But inside the boardroom, Stella Joshua stood alone at the head of the table, looking out at the city where she'd just claimed her throne. As Nathan's security badge was deactivated, Stella's nameplate was already being installed on the executive door. Chapter 9. Empire's End. Empress's Beginning. Nathan Charlie fell from billionaire to bankruptcy in 72 hours. Stella Joshua rose from housewife to headline news in the same time frame. The morning edition of the Wall Street Journal featured Stella's photograph above the fold. Her confident smile, captured during yesterday's press conference announcing her appointment as CEO. The image showed her standing behind a podium, with the company logo prominently displayed, flanked by board members whose expressions conveyed both respect and relief at having found competent leadership in their hour of crisis. The headline read, From Boardroom Wife to Corporate Leader, the Stella Joshua Revolution. Similar stories dominated every major publication, each trying to capture the unprecedented nature of her rise to power and the dramatic circumstances that had made it possible. International. Media had picked up the story with fascination. European. Financial papers analyzed her strategic approach. Asian markets responded positively to her appointment, and business schools were already requesting interviews for case studies about transformational leadership during corporate crisis. Stella sat in Nathan's former office, now her office, with fresh flowers replacing his expensive sculptures and family photos replacing his awards, reading the coverage while sipping coffee from her grandmother's china cup. The morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated the space differently now. casting everything in golden tones that spoke of new beginnings rather than dark secrets and hidden agendas. The transformation wasn't just physical. The entire atmosphere of the building had changed. Employees walked with lighter steps, smiled more freely, and spoke with the enthusiasm of people who finally felt valued rather than merely tolerated. Her assistant, Jennifer, knocked and entered with another stack of newspapers and magazines, her arms full of evidence that the story had captured global attention. "The international press has picked up the story," Jennifer reported with barely contained excitement. "The London Times, Le Figaro, Tokyo Financial Review, and Bloomberg International all want exclusive interviews. The phones haven't stopped ringing. Schedule them for next week," Stella replied, setting down the Wall Street Journal. "This week I want to focus on internal operations and employee morale." The transformation of Charlie Industries had begun immediately after Stella's appointment. Her first executive decision was to reverse Nathan's most harmful policies, reinstating employees who'd been unfairly terminated, restoring benefits that had been cut to pad profits, and implementing transparency measures that encouraged open communication throughout the organization. The response from employees had been overwhelmingly positive. People who'd worked in fear under Nathan's regime suddenly found themselves valued and heard. Productivity increased, turnover dropped, and for the first time in years, Charlie Industries felt like a place where people wanted to work, rather than somewhere they simply endured. "There's also a call from 60 Minutes, Jennifer continued. "They want to do a profile piece about your transformation of the company culture." "Accept that one," Stella decided. "But make it clear that this story isn't about me. It's about what happens when employees are treated with respect and given opportunities to excel." Stella's approach to leadership was everything Nathan's had not been. Where he had ruled through intimidation, she led through inspiration. Where he had hoarded information, she shared knowledge. Where he had taken credit for others' work, she celebrated team achievements. The financial markets had responded to these changes with enthusiasm. Charlie Industries' stock, which had plummeted during Nathan's arrest, had not only recovered but reached record highs as investors recognized the stability and growth potential of Stella's leadership. Her phone buzzed with a text from Peony. "Saw you on CNN this morning. Mom and Dad would be so proud. You've become everything Nathan pretended to be." Stella smiled, remembering how this had all started with her sister's careful observation and courage to speak truth. Peony had been promoted to senior pilot and was being featured in aviation magazines as an example of professional excellence and integrity. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Diana Ashford entered, carrying a bouquet of white orchids and wearing an expression of genuine admiration. "I wanted to congratulate you properly," Diana said, placing the flowers on Stella's desk. "When I told you to call if you ever moved beyond party planning, I had no idea you'd move quite this far." "I had excellent teachers," Stella replied graciously. "Your advice about timing and market positioning was invaluable." Diana settled into the chair across from Stella's desk, the same chair where Nathan had once held court with intimidating authority. "The industry is buzzing about your leadership style. Transparency, employee empowerment, ethical practices, it's revolutionary." "It's just decent human behavior," Stella corrected. Nathan made it seem revolutionary by being so consistently terrible. They talked for 20 minutes about industry trends, collaborative opportunities, and the changing landscape of corporate leadership. What had once been conversations between wife and competitor had evolved into discussions between peers and potential partners. After Diana left, Stella turned her attention to the stack of legal documents that represented the final chapter of Nathan's story. His criminal trial was scheduled to begin in 6 months, but the evidence was so overwhelming that his attorneys were already negotiating plea agreements. Nathan had lost everything with stunning speed. The federal government had seized his hidden assets. the properties purchased with stolen funds, and the Swiss accounts filled with laundered money. His reputation was destroyed, his relationships severed, and his future reduced to choosing between decades in prison or cooperation with prosecutors. Katia, his former mistress, had disappeared immediately after his arrest. Intelligence suggested she'd returned to Eastern Europe with whatever cash and jewelry she could liquidate quickly. She'd abandoned Nathan as soon as his money disappeared, proving that their relationship had been as transactional as everything else in his life. The most telling detail was that Nathan had received no visitors during his incarceration. No friends offering support, no business associates expressing loyalty, no one willing to associate with his disgrace. He'd spent years treating people as disposable, and now he'd learned how it felt to be discarded. Stella felt no satisfaction in Nathan's suffering, but she felt profound relief that his capacity to harm others had been eliminated. His employees were thriving, his victims were being compensated, and his crimes were being prosecuted. Her intercom buzzed. "Mrs. Joshua, there's a reporter from Forbes here for your 3 o'clock interview. Send them in," Stella replied, straightening her jacket and preparing to discuss the future rather than the past. The Forbes interview was part of a cover story about women transforming corporate America. The reporter, an intelligent woman named Rebecca Martinez, asked thoughtful questions about Stella's vision for ethical leadership and sustainable growth. What would you say to other women who feel powerless in corporate environments? Rebecca asked. Stella considered the question carefully. Power isn't something you're given. It's something you develop. Learn everything you can, build genuine relationships, and never underestimate your own capabilities. Most importantly, remember that true power comes from serving others, not exploiting them. Any advice for dealing with men like your former husband? Document everything, trust your instincts, and remember that bullies are usually cowards, Stella replied. Nathan seemed invincible because he'd never faced real consequences. When someone finally held him accountable, his empire collapsed overnight. The interview concluded with questions about Stella's future plans for Charlie Industries. She outlined her vision for sustainable growth, employee ownership programs, and community investment initiatives that would transform the company from Nathan's vehicle for personal enrichment into a force for positive change. As evening approached, Stella found herself alone in her office, looking out at the city lights and reflecting on the extraordinary journey from that morning when Peony had called with devastating news. In less than a year, she'd transformed from Nathan's manageable wife into one of the most powerful executives in the industry. Her desk phone rang, interrupting her contemplation. "Stella, this is Robert Hayes. I wanted to let you know that the board has been discussing your performance, and we're unanimous in our desire to remove the interim from your CEO title. That's very generous, Robert, but I think we should wait until—" "Stella," Robert interrupted gently, "you've accomplished more positive change in 1 week than Nathan managed in 5 years. The employees respect you, the investors trust you, and the industry is watching to see how far you'll go. Don't underestimate yourself the way Nathan underestimated you." After hanging up, Stella sat in the gathering darkness, processing the magnitude of her transformation. She'd begun this journey seeking justice for Nathan's betrayal, but she'd discovered something far more valuable: her own capacity for leadership, her power to create positive change, and her ability to inspire others to achieve excellence. Nathan's empire was built on fear and greed. Stella's was being built on respect and brilliance. Chapter 10. The Crown That Fits. The award ceremony stage had never held someone who carried both justice and power with such elegant grace. The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and the diamonds of 500 guests representing the pinnacle of business, politics, and society. The venue itself was a testament to luxury and influence. Hand-painted murals depicting the history of American commerce, imported marble from the same quarries that had supplied European palaces, and acoustics designed to carry every word to the furthest corners without electronic amplification. Tonight's ceremony for Most Powerful Woman of the Year had attracted international attention, with delegations from Fortune 500 companies, representatives from foreign governments, and media crews from networks around the world. But all eyes were focused on one woman who had redefined what power looked like in the modern world, who had proven that true strength came from moral courage rather than corporate intimidation. Stella Joshua sat at the head table, her presence commanding attention without demanding it, radiating the kind of quiet authority that made everyone else seem slightly diminished by comparison. She wore midnight blue silk that complemented her skin beautifully, with her grandmother's pearl necklace as the only jewelry. Elegant, understated, powerful. The simplicity of her appearance only emphasized the magnitude of her accomplishments. Around her sat CEOs, whose companies controlled billions in assets, senators whose votes shaped national policy, ambassadors whose words could influence international relations, and celebrities whose opinions reached millions of people. But she was undeniably the center of gravity in the room, the person everyone wanted to meet, to photograph, to understand. The master of ceremonies, renowned journalist Anderson Cooper, stepped to the podium as dinner concluded, his presence commanding the attention of an audience accustomed to being the most important people in any room. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's award for Most Powerful Woman recognizes someone who didn't just achieve success. She revolutionized our understanding of leadership itself, proving that true power comes from serving others rather than exploiting them. Stella listened to the introduction with calm composure, but her mind drifted to the extraordinary year behind her. Charlie Industries had not only recovered from Nathan's damage, but had become a model for ethical corporate governance. Employee satisfaction was at record highs, profits had increased 40%, and the company had been featured in Harvard Business School case studies about transformational leadership. She transformed a company culture from one of fear to one of empowerment. Anderson continued. She proved that treating employees with respect and dignity isn't just morally right, it's extraordinarily profitable. The camera panned across the audience, capturing nodding heads and appreciative smiles. In the business world, Stella's methods had initially been viewed with skepticism, but the results spoke for themselves. Other corporations were now studying her approach, implementing similar policies, and discovering that ethical leadership produced better outcomes than exploitation. But perhaps most remarkably, Anderson's voice grew more serious. She demonstrated that justice and success are not mutually exclusive. She held a corrupt leader accountable while building something better from the ruins of his empire. In the back of the ballroom, barely visible in the shadows between marble columns, sat a broken man whose presence nobody had noticed or acknowledged. Nathan Charlie, released on bail pending his trial, had somehow gained entry to witness his former wife's triumph, perhaps through connections that still owed him favors, or perhaps through the simple expedient of paying someone who needed money more than they feared association with his disgrace. Nathan watched with a mixture of fascination and horror as Anderson detailed Stella's achievements with the reverence usually reserved for historical figures. The same woman he'd dismissed as manageable was being celebrated as one of the most influential leaders in the world. The quiet wife who'd never questioned his decisions had become the architect of his destruction, and the builder of something far greater than anything he'd ever created or even imagined possible. His once commanding presence was reduced to hollow cheeks and ill-fitting clothes that spoke of a man who'd lost everything: wealth, power, respect, and most devastatingly, his sense of identity. The expensive suits had been seized by federal marshals, the luxury cars impounded as evidence. The exclusive club memberships revoked the moment his arrest became public knowledge. "Ladies and gentlemen," Anderson announced with the gravity of someone making history, "this year's most powerful woman of the year, Stella Joshua." The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause as Stella rose gracefully and moved toward the stage, her every step captured by cameras that would carry this image around the world. Camera flashes illuminated her path like stars guiding a constellation, and the ovation continued for nearly 2 minutes, a testament to the profound impact she'd made on everyone present and the inspiration her story had provided to countless others watching from around the globe. Stella reached the podium and waited for the applause to subside, her presence commanding silence with quiet authority. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the room without strain or effort. "Thank you for this incredible honor," she began, her words carrying genuine humility despite her commanding position. "But I want to be clear about something. This award doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every employee who chose courage over comfort, every whistleblower who spoke truth to power, and every person who refused to accept that corruption and cruelty was simply the price of doing business." The audience listened with rapt attention as Stella continued. "A year ago, I was told by someone close to me that I was manageable, that I was too quiet, too trusting, too weak to challenge the status quo." Her smile was radiant with confidence. "Today, I want to speak directly to every person who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told that they don't have what it takes to create change." In the shadows, Nathan's hands trembled as he recognized his own words being quoted back to him in front of the world's most powerful people. Power isn't about commanding others. It's about empowering them, Stella declared. It's not about taking credit, it's about sharing success. It's not about accumulating wealth for yourself, it's about creating value for everyone. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience with laser focus. Real power comes from serving something larger than yourself. It comes from having the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult. It comes from understanding that true strength is measured not by what you can take, but by what you can give. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word as Stella transformed the awards ceremony into something approaching a movement. Tonight, I challenge every leader in this room to ask themselves, are you using your power to lift others up or to hold them down? Are you creating opportunities for growth or obstacles to advancement? Are you building something that will outlast you or something that serves only yourself? Nathan felt tears streaming down his face as he listened to the woman he'd betrayed deliver a speech that represented everything he'd never understood about leadership, about power, about what it meant to be truly successful. The greatest leaders in history are remembered not for what they accumulated, but for what they contributed, Stella continued. Not for how much they took, but for how much they gave. Not for how many people served them, but for how many people they served. She lifted the Crystal Award, its facets catching the light like a prism. This recognition belongs to everyone who believes that business can be a force for good, that success should be shared, and that the most powerful person in any room is the one who uses their influence to help others reach their potential. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes. CEO after CEO, senator after senator, leader after leader rose to their feet in recognition of not just Stella's achievements, but the vision she'd articulated for what leadership could be. As the applause finally subsided, Stella delivered her closing words with quiet conviction. To everyone who has ever been told they don't matter, that their voice doesn't count, that they're too small to make a difference, you have more power than you know. The question isn't whether you have what it takes to create change. The question is whether you have the courage to try. She left the stage to another thunderous ovation, but her words lingered in the room like an electric charge. Conversations had already begun about how to implement her vision, how to transform corporate cultures, how to measure success in terms of human impact rather than just financial gain. In the back of the room, Nathan remained seated as the crowd began to disperse. He watched his former wife accept congratulations from world leaders, shake hands with Fortune 500 CEOs, and pose for photographs that would appear on magazine covers around the globe. Finally, as the ballroom began to empty, Nathan rose unsteadily and made his way toward the exit. As he reached the door, he turned for one last look at the woman who had been his wife. Stella stood at the center of a group of admirers, radiant with confidence and surrounded by people who genuinely respected her achievements. She was laughing at something someone had said, her joy infectious and authentic. She looked like someone who had found her true calling, who was living exactly the life she was meant to live. In that moment, Nathan finally understood what he had lost with devastating clarity. Not just a wife, not just a fortune, not just a company. He had lost the opportunity to be part of something meaningful, something larger than himself, something that would have made him better than he'd ever imagined possible. He had traded the love of an extraordinary woman for the temporary pleasure of deceiving her, and the cost of that trade was everything that mattered. As Stella's crown caught the lights of 1,000 cameras, Nathan finally understood the truth that had eluded him throughout their marriage. He had never been the king. She had always been the empress, and empresses never forgive. They simply reign. Stella stood at the center of a group of admirers, radiant with confidence and surrounded by people who genuinely respected her achievements. She was laughing at something someone had said, her joy infectious and authentic. She looked like someone who had found her true calling, who was living exactly the life she was meant to live. In that moment, Nathan finally understood what he had lost with devastating clarity. Not just a wife, not just a fortune, not just a company. He had lost the opportunity to be part of something meaningful, something larger than himself, something that would have made him better than he'd ever imagined possible. He had traded the love of an extraordinary woman for the temporary pleasure of deceiving her, and the cost of that trade was everything that mattered. As Stella's crown caught the lights of 1,000 cameras, Nathan finally understood the truth that had eluded him throughout their marriage. He had never been the king. She had always been the empress, and empresses never forgive. They simply reign.